The shotgun blast tore through the morning air of Fairplay, Colorado, shattering the peaceful mountain silence and sending Vernon stumbling backward into the doorframe of her brother's jailhouse, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched a stranger dive behind a water trough across the dusty street. It was the summer of 1879, and the thin mountain air at nearly 10,000 feet carried sounds with crystalline clarity, which meant everyone within 2 blocks had heard the commotion and would be rushing to see what had happened. Deanna pressed her palm against the rough wooden frame, steadying herself as she searched for the source of the gunfire, her eyes landing on old Ephraim Tucker standing outside the mercantile with his smoking shotgun pointed at the sky, his weathered face twisted in rage. "You thieving son of a gun!" Ephraim shouted at the stranger behind the trough. "I seen you eyeing my supplies. Strangers ain't welcome here no more, not after what happened last month." Deanna rushed into the street, her blue calico dress swirling around her ankles as she ran toward Ephraim. "Mr. Tucker, put that gun down this instant. My brother will have you in a cell if you discharge that weapon at another person." The stranger rose slowly from behind the trough, his hands held high and empty. Deanna caught her breath despite the tension of the moment. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that stretched his dusty brown shirt taut across his chest. Dark hair fell to his collar beneath a worn black hat, and his face, covered in several days' worth of stubble, held an expression of weary patience rather than fear. His eyes, she noticed even from 20 feet away, were a striking shade of gray that reminded her of storm clouds gathering over the mountains. "Madam, I appreciate the intervention," the stranger said, his voice a low rumble that carried an accent she could not quite place, somewhere between Texas drawl and something more refined. "But I was just watering my horse. Haven't stolen a thing, haven't even been in town more than 10 minutes. Ephraim spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "That's what the last one said before he cleaned out half my stock and shot poor Deputy Morris. Ephraim Tucker." Deanna planted herself between the old man and the stranger, her hands on her hips. "You know perfectly well that Deputy Morris is recovering just fine, and that thief was caught and hanged in Denver 3 weeks ago. This man has done nothing wrong, and you are creating a disturbance that will have Sheriff Vernon very unhappy with you." The mention of her brother's name and title made Ephraim lower his shotgun slightly, though his scowl remained fixed. "Your brother ain't been the same since the incident, Miss Deanna. Whole town's on edge. We got a right to be suspicious of drifters." "You have a right to be cautious, not to shoot at innocent people," Deanna said firmly. She turned to face the stranger, really looking at him now in the bright July sunshine. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw and a face that would have been handsome if not for the obvious exhaustion etched into every line. Dust covered his clothes from the trail, and his horse, a sturdy roan gelding tied near the trough, looked equally travel-worn. "I apologize for this greeting, stranger. Fairplay is usually more hospitable than this." The man lowered his hands slowly, his gray eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "No apology necessary, madam. I have been on the receiving end of much worse welcomes. Name's Kellan Briggs, and I was just passing through, looking for work if any is available, but I understand if the town would prefer I keep moving." "Work?" Ephraim snorted. "What kind of work would a drifter like you be qualified for?" Kellan's expression remained neutral, but Deanna saw his jaw tighten slightly. "I can break horses, mend fences, work cattle, do carpentry, handle a forge if needed. I have been ranch working since I was 14 years old, mister. Did 3 years as a deputy down in New Mexico Territory, before moving on. I earn my keep wherever I go. Diana felt something shift in her chest at his words. There was no bragging in his tone, just simple statement of fact, delivered with the quiet confidence of a man who knew his own worth but did not feel the need to prove it to anyone. She had seen too many men in Fairplay who talked big and delivered little. Her brother Matthew was drowning in responsibilities since the attempted robbery that had left his deputy wounded and 2 townspeople dead. The town had been crying out for another lawman, but Matthew refused to hire anyone he did not trust completely, which left him working 18-hour days and growing more haggard by the week. "This town could use a man with your skills," Diana said before she could stop herself. The words hung in the air between them, and she saw surprise flicker across Kellan's face. "My brother is the sheriff here, and he has been trying to manage everything alone. If you truly have experience as a deputy, I suspect he would want to speak with you." "Now hold on just a minute," Ephraim protested. "We don't know nothing about this fella, could be lying through his teeth." "Then my brother will determine that," Diana said. She looked at Kellan again, searching his face for any sign of deception, but finding only honest weariness. "If you are willing to wait, Mr. Briggs, Sheriff Vernon should be back within the hour. He rode out to the Morrison Ranch to settle a dispute about water rights." Kellan studied her for a long moment, and Diana felt heat rise to her cheeks under his scrutiny. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I appreciate the offer, madam. I will water my horse and wait. What do I call you, if I might ask?" "Diana Vernon," she said, extending her hand before remembering that proper ladies did not shake hands with strange men in the middle of the street. But Kellan had already reached out, his large hand engulfing hers in a grip that was firm but gentle. His palm was calloused and warm, and the contact sent an unexpected jolt through her arm that she tried to ignore. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Vernon," Kellan said, releasing her hand. "And I apologize again for the disturbance." "It was not your disturbance to apologize for," Diana replied. She turned back to Ephraim, who was still glowering but had at least lowered his shotgun completely. "Mr. Tucker, I suggest you return to your store. If my brother hears about this, he will want a word with you about discharging firearms within town limits." Ephraim grumbled something unintelligible but shuffled back toward his mercantile, shooting one last suspicious glare at Kellan before disappearing inside. Diana became aware that a small crowd had gathered on the wooden sidewalks, drawn by the gunshot. She recognized most of them, her neighbors and friends who had watched her grow up in this mountain town. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, young Tommy Wright who worked at the livery, old Doc Patterson with his ever-present black bag, and Sarah Mitchell who ran the restaurant with her husband. "Everything's fine," Diana called out to them. "Just a misunderstanding. No one is hurt." The crowd began to disperse, though Diana caught more than one curious glance directed at Kellan. Strangers were not uncommon in Fairplay, which sat along several important mining routes and served as a supply hub for the surrounding camps and ranches. But the incident last month had made everyone jumpy. 2 men had ridden into town pretending to be cattle buyers, had spent 3 days gaining people's trust, then had robbed the bank and shot anyone who got in their way. Deputy Morris had taken a bullet to the shoulder trying to stop them, and the Thompson family's eldest son had died protecting his mother when the robbers tried to steal their horses. The other casualty had been Mary Ellen Price, the banker's wife, who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Diana pushed those dark thoughts away as she watched Kellan lead his horse to the trough. The animal drank deeply while Kellan removed his hat and dunked his own head in the water, then shook like a dog, sending droplets flying. When he straightened, Pushing his wet hair back from his face, Deanna found herself staring. Without the hat and dust obscuring his features, she could see the strong lines of his face, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, the thin scar that ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline. "You are staring, Miss Vernon," Kellan said quietly, though not unkindly. Deanna jerked her gaze away, mortified. "I apologize. That was rude of me. Understandable given the circumstances." Kellan replaced his hat and began checking his horse's hooves, moving with the easy competence of a man who had performed these tasks thousands of times. "You are concerned about bringing a stranger to your brother's attention. Smart of you to be cautious." "I am not cautious enough, according to Matthew," Deanna said, moving closer despite herself. "He says I am too trusting, too quick to see the best in people." "Is that such a bad thing?" Kellan asked, setting down the horse's hoof and looking up at her. "It can be in times like these." Deanna folded her arms across her chest, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt standing in the middle of the street having this conversation. "But I prefer to believe that most people are decent until proven otherwise. My brother has had to see too much darkness lately. Someone needs to remember that there is still light." Something shifted in Kellan's expression, a softening around his eyes that made him look younger and infinitely more vulnerable. "That is a rare philosophy, Miss Vernon. I hope the world does not prove you wrong." "It has not yet," Deanna said, though even as she spoke the words, she thought of the Thompson boy lying in the street, of Mrs. Price's senseless death, of the fear that had gripped the town ever since. "Or perhaps it has, but I choose to keep believing anyway." Kellan straightened, his considerable height making Deanna crane her neck to maintain eye contact. She was not a short woman, standing 5 feet and 6 inches, but he towered over her by at least half a foot. "That takes courage," he said simply. Before Deanna could respond, the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the far end of the street. She recognized her brother's bay stallion immediately, along with Matthew's tall, lean figure in the saddle. He was riding at a trot, which meant the dispute at the Morrison Ranch had been resolved peacefully. Good. Matthew did not need more conflict today. "That's the sheriff," Deanna said unnecessarily. "Let me speak to him first, explain the situation." Kellan nodded, stepping back to give her space. Deanna walked toward her brother, raising her hand in greeting. Matthew pulled his horse to a stop beside her, his hazel eyes so like their father's, taking in the scene with practiced assessment. He was 29, only 3 years older than Deanna, but the past month had aged him considerably. New lines bracketed his mouth and shadows lurked beneath his eyes. "What happened?" Matthew asked without preamble. "I heard a shot from half a mile out." "Ephraim Tucker got spooked by a stranger and fired into the air," Deanna said quickly. "No one was hurt, and I convinced him to return to his store. Matthew, the stranger, is a drifter named Kellan Briggs, and he says he has experience as a deputy. He is looking for work." Matthew's gaze swung to Kellan, who stood waiting beside his horse with the patient stillness of a man accustomed to being evaluated. Deanna saw her brother's eyes narrow, cataloging every detail. The worn but well-maintained gear, the way Kellan carried himself, the gun belt slung low on his hips with a Colt revolver that looked both used and meticulously cared for. "Deputy experience, you say?" Matthew dismounted, tying his horse to a hitching post. "Where?" "Las Cruces, New Mexico Territory," Kellan replied. "Worked under Sheriff William Reinerson for 3 years from 73 to 76. Before that, ranch work in Texas. I can provide references if needed, though they will take time to arrive by telegraph or mail." "Why did you leave Las Cruces?" Matthew's tone was neutral, But Deanna knew her brother well enough to hear the suspicion underlying the question. Kellan did not flinch from the scrutiny. "Personal reasons, Sheriff. Nothing that reflects poorly on my service. Sheriff Reinerson will confirm that I left in good standing." "Personal reasons covers a lot of ground," Matthew said. "I need more than that if I am to consider you for any position in this town." Deanna saw Kellan's jaw work, saw the internal debate playing out behind his gray eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower and rougher than before. "My wife died in childbirth in the spring of '76. The baby did not survive either. I could not stay in Las Cruces after that. Too many memories. I have been drifting since, taking work where I can find it, trying to outrun the ghosts." The raw honesty in his words struck Deanna like a physical blow. She saw her brother's expression soften slightly, saw him glance at her as if seeking her opinion. Deanna gave a small nod, trusting her instincts about this man. Matthew sighed, running a hand through his brown hair. "I am sorry for your loss, Mr. Briggs. That is a heavy burden to carry, but you must understand my position. This town was attacked a month ago. 2 people died, my deputy was wounded, and the citizens are frightened. I cannot afford to make a mistake in who I trust." "I understand completely, Sheriff," Kellan said. "I would feel the same in your position. I will wait while you send a telegram to Las Cruces if you wish. I have nowhere else I need to be." Matthew studied him for another long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Come to my office. I will take down your information and send that telegram. If Sheriff Reinerson vouches for you, we can discuss the possibility of a temporary position. I will not lie to you, Mr. Briggs. The pay is poor, the hours are long, and the danger is real, but I am drowning in work and this town needs help. That is all I am asking for, Sheriff. A chance to prove myself." Kellan extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Matthew shook it. Deanna felt relief wash through her, though she could not entirely explain why this stranger's fate mattered so much to her. She had learned to trust her instincts about people over her 26 years, and everything about Kellan Briggs spoke of integrity beneath the dusty, road-weary exterior. "Deanna, you should head home," Matthew said. "I will handle this from here." "I will come with you," Deanna said, ignoring her brother's frown. "I was there when the incident occurred. I should give my account of what happened with Ephraim." Matthew knew better than to argue when Deanna used that particular tone. "Fine. But then you go home. Mother will worry if you are gone too long." Deanna bit back a retort about being 26 years old and perfectly capable of making her own decisions about when to return home. She had been living with her mother in the small house on the edge of town since their father died 5 years ago, helping to manage the household and contributing what she could from the sewing and mending work she took in. It was a respectable life for an unmarried woman, but sometimes Deanna chafed at the constraints, at the constant oversight and concern. The 3 of them walked toward the jailhouse, Kellan leading his horse. Several townspeople watched from windows and doorways, and Deanna could practically feel their curiosity burning against her back. By supper time, everyone in Fairplay would know that the sheriff's sister had defended a strange drifter and convinced Matthew to consider hiring him. The gossip would be intense, but Deanna had never let public opinion dictate her actions. The jailhouse was a sturdy log structure that also served as Matthew's office and housed 2 cells in the back. It was one of the oldest buildings in Fairplay, built in the early 1860s when the town was first established during the Colorado Gold Rush. The interior was sparse but functional. A large desk covered in papers, several wooden chairs, a gun rack on the wall, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and wanted posters tacked to a bulletin board. Matthew gestured for Kellan to take a seat while he moved behind his desk. Deanna settled into a chair near the window, content to observe. She watched as Kellan removed his hat, revealing more of his face in the light filtering through the dusty glass. He was handsome in a rugged way that had nothing to do with classical features, and everything to do with character, etched into every line. She caught herself staring again and forced her attention to her brother instead. "Full name, age, and place of birth," Matthew said, pulling out a ledger and dipping a pen in ink. "Kellan James Briggs, 27 years old, born in Austin, Texas on March 15, 1852. Matthew wrote this down, his pen scratching across the paper. "Next of kin. None living. My parents died of fever when I was 16. My wife's family would not speak to me after her death. They blamed me for taking her away from Pennsylvania, said the frontier was too dangerous for a woman of her delicate constitution." Kellan's voice was steady, but Deanna heard the old pain beneath the words. "You have any outstanding warrants or legal troubles anywhere?" "No, sir. Clean record." "Are you currently wanted for any crimes?" "No, sir." "Can you read and write?" "Yes, sir. My mother was a school teacher. She made sure I had a proper education before she passed." Matthew looked up from his writing, studying Kellan with new interest. "That is unusual for a ranch hand." "My mother believed education was the key to making something of yourself," Kellan said. "She was disappointed when I chose ranch work over teaching or law, but she supported my decision nonetheless." "And your wife, what was her name?" Deanna saw Kellan's hands tighten on his knees, the only sign of discomfort. "Caroline. Caroline Elizabeth Briggs, born Caroline Elizabeth Morrison. We were married for 2 years and 8 months. "I am sorry," Matthew said again, and this time there was genuine sympathy in his voice. "Losing someone you love is never easy. I know my sister and I have been fortunate to still have our mother after losing our father." The two men shared a moment of understanding, a recognition of shared grief that needed no further words. Deanna felt her throat tighten with emotion. She remembered how devastated she and Matthew had been when their father, John Vernon, had died suddenly from a heart ailment. He had been sheriff before Matthew, had trained his son from a young age to follow in his footsteps. The loss had been crushing, but at least they had known it was coming, had seen the signs of his failing health. What must it be like to lose a young wife, an unborn child with no warning, no time to prepare? Matthew returned to his questions, going through a thorough list that covered Kellan's experience with firearms, his knowledge of law enforcement procedures, his ability to handle difficult situations, and his understanding of the challenges facing a small mountain town. Kellan answered each question with quiet competence, neither boasting nor downplaying his abilities. Deanna found herself impressed by his responses, by the clear intelligence and thoughtfulness he brought to each answer. When Matthew finally set down his pen, nearly an hour had passed. "I will send that telegram today. If I receive a positive response from Sheriff Reinerson, I will offer you a trial period of 1 month as deputy. The pay is $40 a month plus meals. You would stay in the back room here at the jailhouse, which is not much but has a bed and a stove. In return, I expect complete honesty, hard work, and a willingness to learn how things work in Fairplay. We are not Las Cruces. We are a small town and people here look after each other. Can you work with those terms?" "Yes, sir," Kellan said without hesitation. "I appreciate the opportunity." "Do not thank me yet," Matthew said dryly. "You have not experienced a full day of work here. Between the miners, the ranchers, the drifters passing through, and the general chaos of trying to maintain order in a town where everyone is armed and opinionated, you may regret accepting this position." "I doubt that, Sheriff. I am used to hard work and difficult people. It is the idle days that have been hardest to bear." Diana understood that sentiment more than she cared to admit. Since finishing her education at the age of 18, she had thrown herself into helping her mother and taking on sewing work, anything to keep her hands and mind busy. The alternative was to dwell on the narrowness of her life, the limited options available to a woman in a frontier town, the slow parade of years stretching ahead with little variation or excitement. "Diana, I need you to give your account of what happened with Ephraim," Matthew said, turning his attention to her. "Start from the beginning." Diana recounted the incident, describing how she had heard the shotgun blast, seen Kellan take cover, and witnessed Ephraim's aggressive behavior. She made sure to emphasize that Kellan had remained calm throughout, had not drawn his weapon or made any threatening moves, had been completely reasonable in the face of unwarranted hostility. "Ephraim is getting worse," Matthew said when she finished. "This is the third incident this month. First, he accused the Reynolds boy of stealing, then he got into that fight with Jacob Preston over a debt that was already paid, and now this. He is letting fear turn him into someone he is not." "Someone should talk to him," Diana said. "He respects Doc Patterson. Maybe Doc could convince him to calm down before he really hurts someone." "Good idea. I will ask Doc to pay him a visit." Matthew stood, stretching his back with a grimace. "Now you really should head home, Diana. Mother will want help with supper preparations." Diana rose, reluctantly accepting her dismissal. She had hoped to stay longer to learn more about Kellan Briggs and his story, but she knew better than to push Matthew when he had made a decision. Besides, her mother really would worry if she stayed away much longer. "It was nice to meet you, Mr. Briggs," Diana said, extending her hand again. "I hope the telegram brings good news." Kellan stood as well, taking her hand gently. "Thank you for your intervention today, Miss Vernon. I am in your debt." "You owe me nothing," Diana said, though she was acutely aware of the warmth of his hand engulfing hers. "I simply did what was right." She pulled her hand away reluctantly and headed for the door. As she stepped into the bright afternoon sunshine, she heard her brother and Kellan resume their conversation inside. Diana walked slowly toward home, her mind churning with thoughts of gray eyes and quiet strength, and a man who had lost everything yet somehow kept going. The Vernon house sat at the end of Aspen Street, a modest two-story structure painted white with green shutters. Her mother, Clara Vernon, was working in the vegetable garden when Diana approached, her graying blonde hair tied back under a bonnet, her hands dark with soil. At 52, Clara was still a handsome woman, though grief and hard work had worn away the softness she had possessed when Diana's father was alive. "There you are," Clara said, looking up with a smile that faded when she saw Diana's expression. "What happened? I heard a gunshot earlier." Diana explained the situation while helping her mother weed the carrots. Clara listened with the patience and understanding she had always shown, rarely interrupting, absorbing every detail before forming her opinions. "This drifter," Clara said when Diana finished. "You like him." It was not a question. Diana felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I barely know him, Mother. I simply think he might be able to help Matthew. The sheriff position is too much for one man." "That is true enough," Clara agreed, sitting back on her heels and studying her daughter. "But I heard something in your voice when you spoke of him, a spark I have not heard in a long time. Mother, please. I am 26 years old, firmly on the shelf and perfectly content with my life. I do not need you matchmaking." 26 is not old," Clara said firmly. "And you are far from content, Diana. You have been restless for years. I see it in the way you stare at the mountains, in how you devour every book you can get your hands on, in the way you throw yourself into causes that need fighting for. You want more than this town can offer you." Diana could not argue with that assessment because it was true. She did want more. She wanted adventure, purpose, a life that felt larger than the small circle of domesticity she inhabited. But wanting something and having it within reach were two very different things. "What I want does not matter," Deanna said quietly. "I have responsibilities here. You need my help. Matthew needs my support. This is my life, and I have made peace with it." "Have you?" Clara reached out and touched Deanna's cheek with soil-stained fingers. "My dear girl, your father would not want you to sacrifice your happiness out of some misguided sense of duty. Neither do I. If this man interests you, explore that interest. See where it leads. He is a drifter, Mother. He has made it clear he does not stay in one place. Getting attached to someone like that would be foolish." "Perhaps," Clara said. "Or perhaps he is drifting because he has not found a reason to stop. Sometimes people need something to anchor them, to remind them what home feels like." Deanna wanted to protest further, but the sound of hoofbeats interrupted her. Both women turned to see Matthew riding up the street at a gallop, his face grim. He reined his horse to a stop at their gate, breathing hard. "Deanna, I need you at the jailhouse right now," Matthew said urgently. "We have a situation." Deanna's heart sank. "What kind of situation?" "The Morrison ranch was hit by rustlers while I was riding back to town. 4 men, heavily armed. They killed 2 ranch hands and made off with nearly 100 head of cattle. John Morrison is organizing a posse, and I need every able body I can get." Deanna stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to stay at the jailhouse with Kellan while I ride out with the posse. If anything happens in town, you two will have to handle it until we return. I know it is not ideal, but I have no choice." "Matthew, I have no law enforcement experience," Deanna protested. "How am I supposed to help?" "Kellan has the experience. You have the knowledge of this town and its people. Together, you should be able to manage for a day or two. I would not ask if I had any other option, Deanna. Please." Deanna looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Go, I will be fine here. Mrs. Henderson will check on me." "All right," Deanna said, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "Let me get a few things from the house." She ran inside, grabbed her warmest shawl even though it was July because mountain nights were cold, a book she had been reading, and the small derringer her father had given her on her 21st birthday. She had practiced with it enough to be reasonably accurate at close range, though she prayed she would never need to use it. When she returned outside, Matthew had already ridden ahead. Deanna hurried through the streets toward the jailhouse, drawing curious stares from people who sensed something was wrong. By the time she arrived, the jailhouse was a hive of activity. At least 20 men were gathered outside, checking weapons and saddling horses. She spotted John Morrison at the center of the group, his weathered face twisted with rage and grief. "They shot Billy and Sam in cold blood," Morrison was saying to the assembled men. "Never gave them a chance. Just rode in shooting and drove off my cattle. I want every last one of those rustlers hanged from the tallest tree we can find." Matthew stood on the jailhouse steps, trying to maintain order. "John, I understand your anger, but we do this by the law. We track them, we apprehend them, and we bring them to trial. No vigilante justice." "To hell with that," someone shouted from the crowd. "Those men deserve to die for what they did." The crowd rumbled agreement, and Deanna felt fear spike through her. She had seen mob mentality before, had watched as reasonable men transformed into something ugly and dangerous when emotions ran high. Matthew needed to get control of this situation quickly, or it would spiral into chaos. Kellan appeared at her elbow, making her jump. "Your brother could use some support," he said quietly. "These men are looking for blood." Without thinking, Deanna climbed the steps to stand beside Matthew. The crowd quieted slightly at her appearance, surprised to see a woman inserting herself into the discussion. "Listen to me," Deanna said, pitching her voice to Carrie. "I know you are angry, I know you want justice. But if you ride out there as a lynch mob instead of a legal posse, you are no better than the men who killed Billy and Sam. You become murderers yourselves. Is that what you want? Is that what their families want? To have their deaths used as justification for lawless violence?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Deanna pressed her advantage. "My brother will lead you. He will track these men and bring them to justice. But it will be legal justice, the kind that allows you all to look at yourselves in the mirror tomorrow and know you did the right thing. The kind that keeps Fairplay from descending into the same lawlessness we are trying to fight against." John Morrison stepped forward, his eyes red-rimmed. "Diana, Vernon, those were good boys who died today. Billy was going to be married next month. Sam had 3 children. You expect me to be calm about that?" "No," Deanna said gently. "I expect you to be furious. I expect you to grieve. But I also expect you to honor their memories by being the man they believed you to be, a man who values justice over revenge." Morrison stared at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "You are right. God help me, you are right. All right, Sheriff. We do this your way. But we do not stop until we find those men." "Agreed," Matthew said. He looked at Deanna with gratitude and something else she could not quite identify. Pride, perhaps. "Mount up, men. We ride in 5 minutes. Be ready for a hard chase. These rustlers have at least a 3-hour head start." The crowd began to disperse as men headed for their horses. Matthew pulled Deanna aside. "That was well done. You might have prevented something very ugly." "Let us hope so," Deanna said. "How long will you be gone? Depends on the trail. Could be 2 days, could be a week." "I have faith in you and Kellan. Keep the peace here and do not take unnecessary risks. If something happens that you cannot handle, send someone to the Morrison Ranch. There are still ranch hands there who can ride for help." "We will be fine," Deanna said with more confidence than she felt. "Just be careful out there. These men have already killed twice." "I will." Matthew squeezed her shoulder, then moved to his horse. Within minutes, the posse was riding out of Fairplay in a thunder of hooves and dust, leaving the town suddenly quiet and empty feeling. Deanna turned to find Kellan watching her with an expression she could not read. "That was impressive," he said. "You have a way with words." "It was nothing," Deanna said, though her hands were shaking slightly with reaction. "Just common sense." "Common sense is not as common as the name suggests," Kellan replied. "Most people in that crowd were ready to commit murder and call it justice. You gave them permission to step back from the edge. That takes skill and courage." Deanna found herself warming under his praise. "My father always said that words could be more powerful than bullets if used correctly. He taught Matthew and me to think before we act, to look for peaceful solutions before resorting to violence." "Wise man," Kellan said. "I wish more people thought that way." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of their new responsibility settling over them. Deanna realized she was about to spend potentially several days in close quarters with a man she barely knew, a man who stirred feelings in her she thought she had long since buried. The prospect was both terrifying and oddly thrilling. "We should establish some ground rules," Kellan said, as if reading her thoughts. "I will sleep in the back room your brother mentioned. You can have the office. I will make sure the stove is always warm and there is hot coffee. You should not feel unsafe at any moment. If you do, you tell me immediately." "Thank you," Deanna said, touched by his consideration. "I appreciate that. And you should know that I am not completely helpless. My father taught me to shoot, and I have this." She pulled the derringer from her pocket, showing him the small but deadly weapon. Kellan's eyebrows rose. "Good. I hope you never need to use it, but it is smart to be prepared. Can you actually hit what you aim at? Most of the time, Deanna said. At least at close range. I am no sharpshooter, but I can defend myself if necessary. That is all anyone can ask. Kellan gestured toward the jailhouse door. We should go inside and make a plan. If your brother is gone for several days, we need to think about potential problems and how to handle them. They spent the next hour discussing various scenarios. What to do if someone was arrested, how to handle disputes, when to use force versus negotiation, where to find help if things got out of control. Deanna was impressed by Kellan's systematic approach, his ability to think through possibilities and prepare for them. She found herself relaxing as they talked, her initial awkwardness fading into something more comfortable. As evening approached, Deanna realized they needed to address the practical matter of food. I should go home and get provisions, she said. We will need supplies if we are staying here for any length of time. I can go, Kellan offered. You should not be walking around alone after dark. This is Fairplay, not Denver, Deanna said with a smile. I have walked these streets alone at night hundreds of times. Besides, my mother will want to see me, and I know where everything is in the house. I will be faster. Kellan looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. All right. But take a lantern, and if you are not back in an hour, I am coming to find you. Deal, Deanna said. She grabbed a lantern from the jailhouse and headed out into the gathering dusk. The walk home was peaceful, the streets nearly empty as people settled in for supper. Deanna took a moment to look up at the mountains surrounding Fairplay, their peaks still snow-capped even in July, glowing pink in the last rays of sunlight. She had lived in sight of these mountains all her life, but their beauty never failed to move her. There was something eternal about them, something that put human concerns into perspective. The mountains would be here long after she was gone, long after Fairplay was dust. It was both humbling and comforting. Her mother was waiting on the porch when Deanna arrived. Matthew stopped by to tell me what happened. Are you sure about this, dear? Staying at the jailhouse with a stranger. Kellan is not really a stranger anymore, Deanna said. And Matthew trusts him enough to leave him in charge. Besides, what choice do we have? Someone needs to maintain order while the posse is gone, Clara sighed. I know, I just worry. You are my only daughter and I cannot help but want to protect you. I understand, Mother, but I will be fine. Kellan seems like a good man and I have my Derringer if anything goes wrong. Which it will not. Famous last words, Clara muttered, but she helped Deanna pack a basket with bread, cheese, dried meat, apples, and a jar of preserves. Make sure you eat properly and get some sleep. You look tired. I am always tired, Deanna said with a laugh. It is the altitude. She kissed her mother's cheek and headed back to the jailhouse, the basket heavy on her arm. True to her prediction, she arrived within the hour. Kellan was standing outside, scanning the street, and visibly relaxed when he saw her approaching. I was about to come looking for you, he admitted. You were gone 58 minutes. Exactly as promised, Deanna said, pleased that he had been concerned. I brought food. Are you hungry? Starving, Kellan admitted. I have not eaten since yesterday afternoon. They went inside and spread the food on Matthew's desk. Deanna found plates and cups in a cupboard and Kellan made coffee on the pot-bellied stove. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, both too hungry for conversation. This is good bread, Kellan said finally. Did you make it? My mother did. She is an excellent baker. I am more skilled with a needle than with dough, I am afraid. Everyone has their talents, Kellan said. I can barely sew a button, so I would say you have me beat there. Deanna smiled. And I could not break a horse or work cattle, so we are even. They talked as they ate, tentative at first but gradually more relaxed. Kellan told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to rope and ride almost before he could walk, about the vast distances and harsh beauty of the land. Deanna spoke of Fairplay, of the mining boom that had built the town, of the characters who had passed through over the years, of the tight-knit community that looked after its own. "You ever want to leave?" Kellan asked. "See what else is out there?" Diana considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. I read about places like San Francisco and New York and wonder what they are like. But then I think about leaving my mother alone, about abandoning Matthew when he needs support, about giving up the mountains and the friends I have here. I suppose I am not brave enough to start over somewhere new." "It is not about bravery," Kellan said quietly. "It is about priorities. You value family and community over personal adventure. That is not cowardice. That is character." "Is that why you drift?" Deanna asked, emboldened by his openness. "Because adventure is more important than roots." Kellan's expression shuddered slightly, and Deanna worried she had pushed too far. But after a moment he answered, "I drift because staying still means facing things I am not ready to face yet. As long as I keep moving, I can tell myself I am searching for something instead of running away. But I know the truth. I am a coward in a way you never could be." "That is not true," Deanna said firmly. "Grief is not cowardice. You lost the person you loved most. Of course you ran. Anyone would." "Caroline would not have," Kellan said. "She would have stayed and fought through the pain, found a way to build a new life even in the wreckage of the old one. She was the strongest person I ever knew, despite her physical frailty. She shamed me with her courage." "You do her no honor by diminishing your own worth," Deanna said gently. "I never met your wife, but I suspect she loved you exactly as you are, including your tendency to run when things get hard. We all have flaws, Kellan. The question is not whether we have them, but what we do in spite of them." Kellan looked at her with those stormy gray eyes, and Deanna felt something shift between them, a deepening of connection that went beyond casual conversation. "You are a wise woman, Deanna Vernon. This town is lucky to have you." "This town needs a man like you," Deanna said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Not just for law enforcement, but for the example you set. You have been through hell, but you are still here, still trying. That matters more than you know." Kellan reached across the desk and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Thank you. I have not had anyone believe in me for a long time. It means more than I can say." They sat like that for several heartbeats, hands clasped, something fragile and precious building in the space between them. Then a dog barked somewhere outside, breaking the spell. Kellan released her hand and stood abruptly, moving to look out the window. "It is getting late," he said, his back to her. "You should get some rest. I will take the first watch. Make sure everything stays quiet." Diana recognized the retreat for what it was, a pulling back from the intimacy that had nearly overtaken them. Part of her wanted to protest, to push forward into whatever was developing between them. But the wiser part understood that some things could not be rushed. Whatever was happening here needed time to grow properly, roots before flowers. "Wake me in a few hours and I will take a turn," Deanna said, standing as well. "We should both get some sleep." "I will be fine," Kellan said. "I am used to long nights." "And I am used to being stubborn," Deanna replied. "Wake me at midnight. That is an order from the sheriff's sister." A small smile tugged at Kellan's lips. "Yes, madam, though I should point out that the sheriff's sister has no actual authority." "Do not let that get around," Deanna said with mock seriousness. "It might ruin my reputation as someone who should be listened to." Kellan's smile widened into something genuine, transforming his face from handsome to devastating. Deanna felt her breath catch and quickly turned away before he could see her reaction. She settled onto the narrow cot Matthew kept in the office for nights when he worked too late to go home, pulling a blanket over herself and trying to get comfortable. Sleep was a long time coming. She was too aware of Kellan moving quietly around the office, checking windows and doors, stoking the fire, settling into the chair with a book she had not noticed him carry in. She was too aware of the strange intimacy of sharing space with a man who was not family, of the trust implied in sleeping while he kept watch. She was too aware of the feelings stirring inside her, feelings she had thought herself too old and too practical to experience. Deanna had been courted before, of course. Several men had expressed interest over the years, but none had ever moved her to accept their proposals. Her mother worried she was too particular, but Deanna had always believed that marriage was too important a decision to make without genuine feeling. She would rather be alone than trapped in a loveless union. But now, lying in the darkness listening to Kellan turn pages, she wondered if she had been waiting all this time for someone like him. Someone wounded but not broken, someone running but ready to stop, someone who could see the person she truly was beneath the proper exterior. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "You have known him for less than a day. This is foolishness." But her heart, traitorous thing that it was, refused to listen. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to Kellan gently shaking her shoulder. "Miss Vernon, Deanna, it is midnight. Your turn to keep watch if you still insist." Deanna sat up, disoriented in the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, casting barely enough light to see by. Kellan stood over her, a dark silhouette against the faint glow. "I insist," Deanna said, her voice rough with sleep. "You need rest too. Call me if anything happens. Anything at all. I am a light sleeper." Kellan handed her a pistol. "Do you know how to use this? It is heavier than your Derringer." "I can manage," Deanna said, taking the weapon carefully. It was indeed much heavier than she was used to, solid and cold in her hands. "Good. I hope you do not need it." Kellan disappeared into the back room, and Deanna heard the creak of a bed as he settled in. The next few hours passed slowly. Deanna kept herself awake by reading, by walking around the office, by stepping outside periodically to check the street. Fairplay was utterly quiet, most people long since asleep. The mountain stars blazed overhead in impossible profusion, the Milky Way a river of light across the black sky. Deanna stood for a long time just staring upward, feeling infinitesimally small and somehow connected to everything at once. When dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Deanna heard Kellan stirring. He emerged from the back room looking rumpled but rested, his hair standing up in places that Deanna found endearingly boyish. "Quiet night?" he asked, immediately moving to build up the fire and start coffee. "Completely. Not even a drunk to deal with. I think everyone is being exceptionally well behaved." "Give it time," Kellan said with the voice of experience. "Trouble always finds a way." He was proven right around mid-morning when Tommy Wright came running into the jailhouse, his young face flushed with excitement and alarm. "Miss Deanna, Deputy Briggs, there is a fight at the saloon. Charlie Henderson and Frank Moore are going at each other, something fierce." Deanna and Kellan exchanged glances and immediately headed for the door. They could hear the commotion before they reached the saloon, the crash of breaking furniture and the shouts of onlookers. Inside, they found chaos. Two men circled each other in the middle of the room, both bleeding from various cuts and bruises, while other patrons cheered them on or tried ineffectively to intervene. "Enough!" Kellan's voice cracked like a whip, stopping both men in their tracks. He waded into the circle, physically separating the fighters with a hand on each man's chest. "Stand down, both of you." "He started it," Charlie Henderson protested, trying to lunge around Kellan. "Called my wife a cheat and a liar because she is," Frank Moore shot back. "She sold me a lame horse and knew damn well it was lame. My wife would never do such a thing." You are the liar. Kellan shoved them further apart, his considerable strength making it look easy. I said enough. You are both coming to the jailhouse to cool off until you can discuss this like civilized human beings. I am not going anywhere with him, Charlie snarled. Diana stepped forward, addressing the crowd rather than the fighters. Everyone out. This establishment is closed until further notice. If you have drinks, finish them quickly and leave. Anyone who refuses will be considered in violation of the peace and subject to arrest. The crowd grumbled but began to disperse. The saloon owner, a balding man named George Stein, looked relieved rather than upset at the closure. Thank you, Miss Vernon. This was getting out of hand. With the crowd gone, Kellan marched Charlie and Frank toward the jailhouse, one hand gripping each man's collar. Diana followed, impressed by how quickly Kellan had taken control of the situation. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had done this dozens of times before, who knew exactly how much force to use and when to apply it. At the jailhouse, Kellan locked Charlie in one cell and Frank in the other, ignoring their continued protests and accusations. You will stay there until Sheriff Vernon returns, or until you both apologize and agree to settle your dispute peacefully, he announced. Diana, can you find Mrs. Henderson and ask her to come speak with us? We need to get to the bottom of this horse situation. Diana nodded and headed out, grateful for the excuse to escape the cramped quarters and the still shouting men. She found Sarah Henderson at the boarding house, a sturdy woman in her 40s with graying hair and worried eyes. Is Charlie all right? Sarah asked immediately. I heard there was a fight. He is fine, just bruised, Diana assured her. But we need to talk about a horse you sold to Frank Moore. He claims it was lame and that you knew it. Sarah's face flushed with anger. That horse was perfectly sound when it left my property. I raised him from a foal, trained him myself. If he is lame now, it is because Frank rode him too hard or did not care for him properly. Would you be willing to examine the horse and explain this to everyone involved? Diana asked. The new deputy wants to sort this out properly. Of course. Sarah grabbed her shawl and followed Diana back to the jailhouse, where they collected Frank and headed to his stable. The horse in question, a handsome bay gelding, was indeed favoring his right front leg. Sarah examined him carefully, running her hands down each leg, checking his hooves, watching him move. This is not a natural lameness, Sarah announced after several minutes. See this swelling here, and the way he flinches when I touch this spot. Someone hit this horse hard enough to bruise the bone, and look at his hooves. They have not been cleaned in days, maybe weeks. This is neglect, pure and simple. Frank's face went bright red. That is not true. I take good care of my animals. Then explain the condition of this horse, Kellan said calmly. Because from where I stand, it looks like Mrs. Henderson is telling the truth. They spent another hour sorting through the situation, examining evidence, taking statements. In the end, it became clear that Frank had indeed neglected the horse and then tried to blame Sarah for his own failings. Kellan forced Frank to apologize publicly, to pay Sarah for veterinary care for the injured horse, and to agree to let Sarah take the animal back if he could not demonstrate proper care going forward. And if I hear of you mistreating any animal again, Kellan added, his voice hard, you will spend a week in jail and pay a substantial fine. Am I clear? Yes, sir, Frank muttered, looking thoroughly chastened. By the time they returned to the jailhouse and released Charlie, it was past noon. Diana realized she was exhausted, the sleepless night and morning's excitement catching up with her. Kellan must have seen it in her face. You should rest, he said. I can manage things for a few hours. I am fine, Diana protested, but her yawn belied the words. Diana. Kellan's voice was gentle but firm. You have been awake all night and dealt with crisis after crisis all morning. You need sleep or you will collapse. Please, trust me to handle things for a few hours. Deanna wanted to argue but recognized the truth in his words. All right. But wake me if anything important happens. I will. Now go lie down before you fall down. Deanna returned to the cot, and this time sleep claimed her almost immediately. She slept deeply, dreamlessly, exhausted enough that the discomfort of the narrow bed barely registered. When she woke, the light slanting through the window suggested late afternoon. She sat up, disoriented, and found Kellan at the desk writing in a ledger. Did I miss anything? She asked, her voice rusty. Nothing exciting. Old Doc Patterson stopped by to check on our prisoners, determined they were fit to release, so I let them go. Ephraim Tucker came by to apologize for yesterday's incident, which I accepted. A few routine questions from citizens that I handled. And your mother brought more food, which is on the desk when you are ready to eat. Deanna stood, stretching her stiff muscles. You have been busy, and my mother came by. What did she say? That I had better take good care of you or she would have my hide, Kellan said with a slight smile. I assured her that you were sleeping peacefully and perfectly safe. I think she believed me, though she gave me a very thorough examination first. That sounds like Mother, Deanna said with affection. She moved to the desk and found a basket covered with a cloth. Inside was fried chicken, biscuits, green beans, and a small apple pie. She is trying to fatten you up. That is a good sign. It means she approves of you. I am honored, Kellan said, and he sounded sincere. She seems like a remarkable woman. She is. She held our family together after my father died, kept Matthew from working himself to death with grief, made sure I did not give up my own dreams to become his unpaid housekeeper. She is the strongest person I know. They ate dinner together as the sun set outside, painting the mountains gold and purple. The conversation flowed easily now, no longer marked by the awkwardness of strangers. Deanna found herself telling Kellan things she rarely shared with anyone. Her frustration with the limited roles available to women, her secret wish to maybe one day write stories or work as a teacher, her fear that she was wasting her life in Fairplay when there was so much world beyond the mountains. Kellan listened with the kind of focused attention that made her feel truly heard. He did not dismiss her concerns or try to convince her she was wrong to feel the way she did. He simply listened, and occasionally offered thoughts that showed he had really understood what she was saying. You could leave, you know, he said when she finished. There are teaching positions all over the West, schools desperate for educated women willing to come and shape young minds. You would be welcomed anywhere you chose to go. And leave Mother alone. Leave Matthew without support. Deanna shook her head. I could not do that to them. Would they want you to sacrifice your happiness for theirs? Kellan asked gently. From what you have told me, I suspect they would rather see you thriving somewhere else than slowly withering here. Perhaps, Deanna admitted. But it is a moot point. I am 26 years old, set in my ways, too old to start over as a teacher somewhere new. That is a dream for 18-year-old girls, not women my age. 26 is not old, Kellan said firmly, and it is never too late to pursue what you truly want. If I have learned anything from losing Caroline, it is that life is too short and too uncertain to waste it living according to other people's expectations. We should chase our dreams while we still can. Is that what you are doing? Deanna challenged. Chasing your dreams by drifting from town to town with no real purpose. She regretted the sharp words immediately, but Kellan did not look offended. Instead, he looked thoughtful. You are right. I am not chasing dreams. I am running from nightmares. But maybe it is time to stop running. Maybe it is time to find something worth staying for. The intensity in his gaze made Deanna's heart race. She felt the pull between them again, stronger now, impossible to ignore. She stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air. "I should check the street," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Make sure everything is quiet." She fled outside before Kellan could respond, breathing in the cool evening air and trying to calm her racing thoughts. What was happening to her? She had known this man for barely 24 hours, and yet she felt more connected to him than to people she had known her entire life. It was irrational, impossible, and completely undeniable. She heard the door open behind her and knew without looking that Kellan had followed. "Deanna, I apologize if I made you uncomfortable. That was not my intention." "You did not," Deanna said, still not turning around. "I made myself uncomfortable. I am feeling things I have no right to feel for someone I barely know." "Such as?" Kellan's voice was close now, right behind her. Deanna forced herself to turn and face him. In the twilight, his features were shadowed but no less compelling. "Such as a connection I cannot explain. Such as a longing for something I am not sure even exists. Such as the impossible thought that maybe you could be the reason I finally leave Fairplay, or the reason I finally want to stay." Kellan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his large hands. His touch was infinitely gentle, his calloused thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "I feel it too. This pull between us. I have been trying to convince myself it is just because we are thrown together in unusual circumstances, but I do not think that is true. I think I started falling for you the moment you stepped between me and Ephraim's shotgun, so fierce and brave and utterly certain you were doing the right thing." "Kellan," Deanna whispered, her hands coming up to rest on his wrists. "We should not do this. You are planning to leave." "I am planning to stay. This can only end in heartache." "Probably," Kellan agreed. "But maybe it is worth it anyway. Maybe some things are worth the risk, even when you know they might hurt." He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Deanna found she could not move. She did not want to move. When his lips touched hers, gentle and questioning, she felt something inside her shift and settle into place, as if a piece of herself she had not known was missing had suddenly been found. The kiss was sweet and tentative, a promise more than a demand. When Kellan pulled back, his eyes searching her face for any sign of regret, Deanna could only stare at him in wonder. "We are both fools," she said finally. "Probably," Kellan agreed again, "but I have been called worse." A shout from down the street interrupted them. They sprang apart as Tommy Wright came running up, his face pale in the fading light. "Deputy Briggs, Miss Deanna. There is trouble at the Morrison Ranch. A rider just came in saying the posse is under attack. They need help right away." Kellan was moving before Tommy finished speaking, running into the jailhouse to grab weapons and supplies. Deanna followed, her mind racing. Matthew was in danger. The posse was in danger. But if she and Kellan left to help them, who would protect Fairplay? "Tommy, run and get every able man who is not with the posse," Deanna ordered. "Tell them to arm themselves and meet us at the edge of town in 10 minutes. Can you do that?" "Yes, madam." Tommy raced off while Deanna helped Kellan gather ammunition and rifles. "You are not coming with me," Kellan said flatly. "This is too dangerous." "My brother is out there," Deanna replied just as firmly. "I am coming. And before you argue, remember that I can shoot and ride as well as half the men in this town. You will need every gun you can get." Kellan looked like he wanted to argue but recognized the futility. "Fine. But you stay behind me at all times, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." Within 15 minutes, they had assembled a group of 8 men, everyone else being either too old, too young, with the posse, or unable to fight for various reasons. It was not much, but it would have to be enough. They rode out of Fairplay at a gallop, following the trail toward the Morrison Ranch as darkness fell completely around them. The mountains were treacherous at night, but they had no choice. Somewhere out there, Matthew and the rest of the posse were fighting for their lives. Deanna pushed her horse hard, trusting the mare to find safe footing, her heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. They heard the gunfire before they saw anything, sharp cracks echoing off the mountains. Kellan held up his hand, signaling everyone to slow and approach carefully. They dismounted and moved forward on foot, using the trees and rocks for cover. The scene that unfolded before them was chaotic. The posse had been ambushed in a narrow canyon, pinned down behind rocks while at least a dozen men fired at them from the high ground. Deanna scanned the area desperately, searching for Matthew, and finally spotted him crouched behind a boulder, returning fire methodically despite blood streaming down his face from a head wound. "We need to flank them," Kellan whispered. "Take the high ground on the left while they are focused on the posse. Deanna, you and 3 men stay here and provide covering fire when we make our move. Do not expose yourselves unnecessarily." Deanna wanted to protest being left behind but recognized the tactical sense in his plan. She nodded reluctantly. "Be careful." Kellan squeezed her hand quickly, then disappeared into the darkness with half their small force. Deanna positioned her remaining men, making sure they had clear lines of fire, then settled in to wait. The minutes stretched endlessly, marked only by the crack of gunfire and her own thundering heartbeat. Then Kellan's group opened fire from the flank, catching the ambushers by surprise. Deanna immediately began firing as well, providing the covering fire Kellan had requested. The attackers, suddenly caught between 2 forces, began to fall back in disarray. It was over in less than 10 minutes, though it felt like hours. When the shooting finally stopped, Deanna scrambled down to where the posse was sheltering, desperate to reach her brother. She found Matthew sitting with his back against a rock, Doc Patterson working on his head wound. "I am fine," Matthew said before Deanna could ask. "Just a graze. Bleeds like hell but barely even hurts. What are you doing here?" "Saving your life, apparently," Deanna said, relief making her voice sharp. "Kellan and I brought reinforcements." "Kellan," Matthew looked around, spotting the tall figure moving among the scattered attackers, checking for survivors. "He did good work here. Those men had us pinned down. Another hour and they would have picked us all off." John Morrison limped over, his leg bandaged but his expression triumphant. "We got 4 of the rustlers, including their leader. The rest scattered when your group hit them from the side. This was good work, Sheriff. Good work indeed." As dawn broke over the mountains, they surveyed the aftermath. 4 of the rustlers were dead, 3 were wounded and captured, and the rest had escaped into the wilderness. The posse had suffered 2 wounded but no deaths, which was close to miraculous given the circumstances. Kellan appeared at Deanna's side, his face grimy with powder smoke but his eyes bright. "You did good out there. Your covering fire was exactly what we needed." "I was terrified the entire time," Deanna admitted. "Fear and courage are not opposites," Kellan said. "Courage is acting despite the fear." "You have plenty of both." They rode back to Fairplay in the morning light, exhausted and battered but victorious. The town turned out to greet them, cheering their success and rushing to help the wounded. Deanna found herself swept up in the celebration, accepting congratulations and thanks from dozens of people who seemed to have forgotten her gender in their gratitude for the rescue. It was not until late afternoon that things finally calmed down enough for her to return to the jailhouse, where Kellan was processing the captured rustlers into the cells. Matthew was with him, his head wrapped in bandages but his expression more relaxed than Deanna had seen it in weeks. "Deanna, I need to talk to you," Matthew said when he saw her. "In private. They stepped outside and Matthew took her hands in his. "What you did last night was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. You could have been killed." "But I was not," Deanna pointed out. "And if we had not come, you might have been." "I know, and I am grateful. But Deanna, you cannot keep putting yourself in danger like this. It is not appropriate for a woman to be involved in gun battles." Deanna pulled her hands away, anger flaring. "Appropriate? Matthew, when have I ever cared about what is appropriate? I did what needed to be done, just like I always do." "I am not criticizing you," Matthew said quickly. "I am just worried about you, but there is something else I need to say, something I observed last night and this morning." Deanna felt her stomach tighten. "What is that, you and Kellan? There is something between you two. I can see it in how you look at each other, how you move around each other." "Deanna, I like Kellan. The telegram from Las Cruces came through this morning with glowing recommendations. He is a good man, and I am going to offer him a permanent position as my deputy. But you need to be careful. He is a drifter by nature. He might not stay, even with a good job and reasons to." "I know that," Deanna said quietly. "Believe me, I know, but Matthew, I am 26 years old. I have been careful my whole life. Maybe it is time to take a risk, even if it might hurt." Matthew studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. Just promise me you will protect your heart as much as possible. I do not want to see you devastated if he leaves." "I promise to try," Deanna said, though she suspected it was already too late for that particular promise. She returned to the jailhouse to find Kellan alone in the office, the prisoners locked away in the back cells. He looked up when she entered, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "Your brother is going to offer me the deputy position permanently," Kellan said without preamble. "Sheriff Reinerson sent a very generous recommendation, but Deanna, before I accept, I need to know something." "What?" Deanna asked, moving closer. "If I stay here, if I put down roots in Fairplay, would that matter to you? Would you want me to stay?" Diana's heart felt too large for her chest. "Yes. God help me, yes. I want you to stay. I want to see where this thing between us goes. I want to know if what I feel after 2 days could possibly be real, or if it is just the circumstances making everything more intense." "It is real," Kellan said, standing and crossing to her in 3 long strides. "At least for me it is. Deanna, I have not felt this way since Caroline died. I did not think I could feel this way again. You have made me want to stop running, want to build something permanent. That terrifies me, but I want to try anyway, if you will have me." "I want to try too," Deanna whispered. "Even though it is insane and we barely know each other, and we could both end up with broken hearts." "Worth the risk," Kellan said firmly. He pulled her into his arms, and Deanna went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady thump of his heart. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, letting the connection between them solidify into something real and undeniable. Over the next few weeks, Kellan settled into his role as Fairplay's deputy with remarkable ease. The townspeople, initially suspicious of the stranger, quickly came to respect his fairness, his competence, and his genuine interest in the community's well-being. He proved himself invaluable to Matthew, taking on half the workload and bringing fresh perspectives to old problems. And through it all, Deanna and Kellan's relationship deepened. They could not spend every moment together given her responsibilities at home and his demanding job, but they found time. Walks through town in the evening, shared meals at her mother's house with Clara's enthusiastic approval, quiet conversations on the jailhouse steps under the endless stars. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Deanna learned about Caroline gradually, understanding that Kellan's first wife would always be a part of him, but that there was room in his heart for new love as well. Kellan learned about Diana's restless spirit, her intellectual hunger, her longing for purpose beyond the narrow confines society prescribed for women. Rather than being threatened by her ambitions, he encouraged them. He brought her books from traveling merchants, asked her opinion on town matters, treated her as an equal partner in conversations rather than someone to be protected or managed. 3 months after Kellan first arrived in Fairplay, he asked Diana to marry him. They were sitting on a blanket beside South Park's glittering stream, having ridden out for a rare afternoon alone together. The August sun was warm but not hot at this altitude, and wildflowers carpeted the meadow in a riot of color. "Diana Vernon," Kellan said, taking her hand and looking into her eyes with that gray storm intensity she had come to love. "I came to this town as a broken man, running from ghosts and convinced I would never find peace again. You showed me I was wrong. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to believe in the future again. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. Will you marry me?" Diana felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The kiss they shared was filled with promise and passion, with the joy of two people who had found each other against all odds and were brave enough to reach for happiness, despite the risks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and laughing, Diana felt more certain of this decision than she had ever felt about anything in her life. "I do not have a ring yet," Kellan said apologetically, "but I have been saving my salary. I will buy you the nicest one I can afford." "I do not need a fancy ring," Diana said firmly. "I just need you." They were married in October, when the aspens had turned the mountains gold and the air held the first whispers of winter. The whole town turned out for the wedding, filling the small church to overflowing. Clara cried happy tears, and Matthew gave Diana away with a smile that said he thoroughly approved of his sister's choice. Even old Ephraim Tucker came, having long since apologized to Kellan and become one of his strongest supporters in town. Diana wore a simple white dress she and her mother had sewn together, and Kellan wore his best suit, his dark hair freshly cut, and his face clean-shaven for the first time since she had known him. When he saw her walking down the aisle, the look of awe and love on his face made Diana's heart soar. They spoke their vows in strong, clear voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever trials life might bring. When the preacher finally pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Kellan kissed her thoroughly, propriety be damned, and Diana laughed against his lips, drunk on happiness. The reception was held at the largest saloon in town, which George Stein had closed to regular business for the occasion. There was music and dancing, abundant food that the whole community had contributed to, and more joy than Diana thought possible. She danced with Kellan, with Matthew, with her new husband again, her feet barely touching the floor. "This town needs a man like you," Diana whispered to Kellan during a slow dance, echoing the words she had spoken the day they met. "Thank God you decided to stay." "I am where I am supposed to be," Kellan replied, pulling her closer. "Right here with you for the rest of my life." They moved into a small house on Aspen Street, not far from Clara's place. It was modest but perfect for them, with 2 bedrooms and a good kitchen and a porch where they could sit and watch the sunset over the mountains. Diana had never been happier than she was in those first months of marriage, learning the rhythms of domestic life with someone she loved deeply, discovering the joy of partnership and intimacy, and simply being together. Kellan proved to be an attentive and thoughtful husband. He helped with chores without being asked, brought her small gifts for no reason, listened when she needed to talk, and gave her space when she needed solitude. He also encouraged her to pursue the teaching dream she had thought long dead. When a position opened at the Fairplay schoolhouse in the spring of 1880, Kellan convinced Diana to apply despite her protests that she was too inexperienced. "You are the smartest person I know," he told her firmly. "Those children would be lucky to have you as their teacher. Do not let fear stop you from trying." Diana applied, and to her shock and delight, she was hired. The school board was desperate for an educated woman willing to take on the 40 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, and Diana's references from various townspeople sealed the decision. She threw herself into teaching with passionate enthusiasm, discovering that she loved working with young minds, loved seeing students grasp new concepts, loved making a difference in their lives. Kellan was endlessly proud of her, bragging to anyone who would listen about his brilliant schoolteacher wife. Diana would blush and tell him to stop, but secretly, she loved his enthusiastic support. It made all the difference, having a partner who genuinely celebrated her successes rather than feeling threatened by them. In the summer of 1881, Diana discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She knew the dangers of childbirth, knew how Kellan had lost Caroline and their baby. When she told him, she watched fear flash across his face before he controlled it, pulling her close and holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We will get through this," he promised, though his voice shook. "You are strong and healthy. You will be fine. You have to be fine." The pregnancy was not easy. Diana suffered terrible nausea for the first 3 months and was exhausted all the time. But Doc Patterson assured her that everything was progressing normally, and gradually her energy returned. Kellan was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly worrying about her, trying to restrict her activities, until Diana finally told him firmly that she would not spend 9 months being treated like an invalid. "I am pregnant, not dying," she said. "I will continue teaching until I can no longer fit behind my desk, and I will continue my normal activities as much as possible. You cannot protect me from every possible harm, Kellan. You just have to trust that I will be all right." It was hard for him, she knew, but he tried to give her the space she needed while still being supportive. As her belly grew, Diana was surprised by how much she loved being pregnant despite the discomfort. Feeling the baby move inside her was magical, a constant reminder of the life she and Kellan had created together. She taught until the end of February 1882, when she was 7 months along and finally too large to move around the schoolroom effectively. The school board found a temporary replacement, and Diana settled into preparing for the baby's arrival. Clara was endlessly helpful, sewing tiny clothes and knitting blankets, sharing wisdom from her own experiences as a mother. In early April, on a chilly morning when the last traces of winter still clung to the high peaks, Diana went into labor. It started slowly, just mild discomfort that gradually intensified into real pain. Kellan fetched Doc Patterson immediately while Clara stayed with Diana, coaching her through the contractions. The labor was long and difficult. 14 hours of pain that seemed never-ending, waves of agony that left Diana exhausted and wondering if she would survive. Kellan stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering words of encouragement even though his own face was pale with fear. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born. He came into the world squalling furiously, healthy and strong, with a full head of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Doc Patterson cleaned him up and placed him in Diana's arms, and she felt a rush of love so intense it took her breath away. "He is perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Kellan, look at him. He is perfect." Kellan stared at his son with an expression of wonder and terror and joy all mixed together. When he finally reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand, the infant gripped his finger reflexively and something in Kellan's face shifted. The last traces of fear and pain from losing Caroline faded, replaced by pure love. "He is perfect," Kellan echoed, his voice choked. "Deanna, you are perfect. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this, for giving us this." They named him James Edward Briggs, after Kellan's father and Diana's father respectively. He was a good baby, relatively calm and easy to soothe, though he kept them up at all hours with his feeding schedule. Deanna was exhausted in a way she had never experienced before, but it was a good exhaustion, born of caring for something precious. Kellan proved to be a devoted father. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with James when he cried at night, sang to him in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. Watching her husband with their son made Deanna fall in love with him all over again, seeing this new tender side of him emerge. The years passed in a blur of joy and routine, and the ordinary challenges of life. Deanna returned to teaching when James was 6 months old, with Clara happily volunteering to watch her grandson during the day. Kellan continued his work as deputy, increasingly taking on more responsibilities as Matthew prepared to eventually step down as sheriff. The town thrived, growing from a rough mining camp into a more established community with churches and schools and proper civic institutions. In 1884, Deanna gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara Rose after both their mothers. This birth was easier than the first, and Clara Rose proved to be as calm and sweet-tempered as her brother had been. James, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. In 1886, their third child arrived, another boy they named Matthew John. This birth was hardest of all, leaving Deanna weak and unable to have more children, according to Doc Patterson. Deanna mourned the loss of that possibility, but also felt grateful for the 3 healthy children she had. Kellan assured her that their family was perfect exactly as it was. Matthew Vernon finally retired as sheriff in 1887, and Kellan was elected to replace him in a landslide. The boy who had drifted into town as a broken stranger 8 years earlier was now one of Fairplay's most respected citizens, trusted to uphold law and order with fairness and integrity. Matthew stayed on as deputy for a year to help with the transition, then retired completely to marry a widow from Denver and focus on ranching. Life settled into comfortable patterns. Deanna taught school, raised their children, participated actively in the community. Kellan served as sheriff, maintaining peace in Fairplay and surrounding areas, earning a reputation as fair but firm. They had their challenges, of course. Money was often tight. Kellan's work was frequently dangerous. The children went through various illnesses and difficulties. But they faced everything together, as partners, drawing strength from each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Kellan took Deanna back to the meadow beside the stream where he had proposed. The children were with Clara for the day, giving them rare time alone. They spread a blanket on the grass, now brown with autumn, and sat together watching the sky change colors as the sun set behind the mountains. "You ever regret it?" Kellan asked quietly. "Staying here with me instead of pursuing bigger dreams elsewhere?" Deanna took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Never. Not once. You showed me that happiness is not about grand adventures or exotic locations. It is about building a life with someone you love, about making a difference in small ways every day, about creating something lasting and real. I have everything I ever wanted right here." "So do I," Kellan said. He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear overhead. "You saved me, Deanna. The day you stood between me and Ephraim's shotgun, when you said this town needs a man like you. You gave me a reason to believe I could be more than my worst moments. You made me want to be better, to try harder, to put down roots and build something permanent. I love you more now than the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That is quite a speech for a man of few words," Deanna teased gently, though her eyes were wet with tears. "You inspire me to eloquence," Kellan replied, kissing her forehead. "Among other things." They stayed until full dark had fallen, and the cold drove them back to their horses. Riding home through the familiar streets of Fairplay, Deanna felt a profound sense of contentment. This was her life, the one she had chosen and built with care and courage. It was not the life she had imagined as a young woman, but it was better than anything she could have dreamed. The years continued to pass. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and nature in equal measure. Clara Rose inherited her mother's quick mind and her father's quiet strength, becoming a determined and capable young lady. Matthew John was the wild one, full of mischief and energy, keeping his parents constantly on their toes. Deanna watched her children grow with pride and occasional terror at how quickly time moved. She saw them through childhood illnesses and scraped knees and school troubles and triumphs. She taught them to read and write and think critically. She shared with them her love of learning and Kellan's values of fairness and hard work. Kellan taught them other lessons: how to ride and shoot and track, how to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult, how to treat everyone with respect regardless of their station in life, how to be honest and brave and kind. He was a patient father, rarely raising his voice but commanding respect through his consistent example. Clara Vernon lived to see all 3 grandchildren grow into teenagers, passing away peacefully in her sleep in 1896 at the age of 69. Deanna mourned her mother deeply but took comfort in knowing Clara had lived to see her daughter happily settled, had known and loved her grandchildren, had been surrounded by family until the end. Matthew and his wife visited regularly from their ranch outside Denver, always bringing news and gossip from the bigger city. Deanna loved these visits, loved hearing about the rapidly changing world beyond Fairplay's mountain valley. But she never felt envious or regretful. She had chosen her path and walked it with her eyes open. In 1900, as a new century began, James left for college in Denver, the first in either family to pursue higher education. Deanna was immensely proud even as she mourned his absence. Clara Rose was 17 and already being courted by several young men, though she insisted she wanted to teach before settling down. Matthew John was 14 and showing signs of following his father into law enforcement, though Kellan secretly hoped he might choose something safer. Deanna and Kellan, now in their late 40s, found themselves with more time together as their children became increasingly independent. They took walks every evening when weather permitted, sat on their porch and talked for hours, rediscovered the romance that had brought them together in the first place. "We have built a good life," Deanna said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "We have," Kellan agreed. He was graying now, lines etched deep around his eyes and mouth, but to Deanna he was as handsome as the day they met. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still." "Years," Deanna repeated, liking the sound of it. "Plenty of time for more adventures." "What kind of adventures?" Kellan asked with amusement. "I thought you said happiness was about small daily moments, not grand adventures." "It is," Deanna said, "but that does not mean we cannot still surprise each other." I am thinking we should travel once you retire from being sheriff. See some of those places I used to dream about. San Francisco, maybe, or Santa Fe. Somewhere with good weather and interesting sights." "I like that idea," Kellan said. "Though wherever we go, we will always come back here." "This is home." "Yes," Deanna agreed, squeezing his hand. "This is home." James graduated from college in 1904 and returned to Fairplay to open a law practice, the first lawyer in town not associated with mining interests. He married a sweet girl from Denver, and they settled into the house Deanna had grown up in, the one that had stood empty since Clara's death. Clara Rose did indeed become a teacher, working alongside her mother at the Fairplay school for 3 years before falling in love with a young rancher. They married in 1905 and moved to a spread 20 miles outside town. Deanna missed having her daughter nearby but loved watching Clara Rose build her own life. Matthew John surprised everyone by not going into law enforcement, but instead opening a general store with a partner. He had inherited his mother's business sense and his father's work ethic, and the store thrived. He married late, at 28, to a widow with 2 children of her own. Deanna loved watching him become a stepfather, seeing the care he took with children not biologically his own. Kellan retired as sheriff in 1908 at the age of 56, after nearly 30 years in law enforcement. The town threw him a massive celebration, with speakers from as far as Denver coming to honor his service. Deanna sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as person after person stood up to describe how Kellan had helped them, had been fair to them, had made Fairplay a better place. They did travel after his retirement, taking the train to San Francisco and marveling at the city rising from the ashes of the great earthquake 2 years prior. They visited Santa Fe and absorbed the ancient culture there. They traveled to St. Louis and saw the Mississippi River. But as Kellan had predicted, they always came home to Fairplay, to the mountains that had witnessed their love story and the town that had become family. In 1911, James and his wife gave Deanna and Kellan their first grandchild, a boy they named Kellan Jr. Deanna held the baby and felt the circle of life complete itself. She was a grandmother now, watching her children experience the joys and terrors she had known raising them. More grandchildren followed over the years as all 3 of their children built families of their own. Deanna and Kellan's house became a gathering place for the whole extended clan on holidays and special occasions, filled with noise and laughter and love. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919, their children organized a huge celebration. The whole town turned out, just as they had for the wedding 4 decades earlier. Deanna and Kellan stood together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and friends, amazed at the life they had built together. 40 years, Deanna said in wonder. How did we get so old? One day at a time, Kellan replied with the same quiet humor he had always possessed. And I would do every single one of those days over again exactly the same way. Even the hard parts, Deanna challenged. Especially the hard parts, Kellan said. The hard parts taught us who we were, made us stronger, brought us closer together. That night, lying in bed in the house they had shared for nearly 40 years, Deanna curled against Kellan's side the way she had done thousands of times before. His arms came around her automatically, holding her close even in sleep. She listened to his breathing, steady and strong, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the gift of their life together. "Thank you," she whispered, not caring if he heard or not. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for 40 years of extraordinary, ordinary life." The years that followed brought changes as they inevitably do. Friends passed away, the world continued its rapid transformation. New technologies arrived even in remote Fairplay. But through it all, Diana and Kellan remained each other's constant, facing everything together as they always had. In 1925, as they approached their 51st anniversary, Kellan's health began to fail. The decades of hard physical work caught up with him, leaving him weaker and more tired than Diana had ever seen. She nursed him as tenderly as he had once cared for her through childbirth and illness, refusing to leave his side for long. "I am not ready to let you go," she told him one afternoon as he rested in their bed, the room filled with late summer sunlight. "We were supposed to have more time." "We have had more than most people get," Kellan said, his voice weaker now but still steady. 51 years together, Diana. 3 children, 8 grandchildren, a life we built with our own hands. That is more than I ever dreamed possible when I rode into Fairplay as a broken drifter. "I was right about you from the first moment," Diana said, holding his hand between both of hers. "This town did need a man like you. I needed a man like you." "And I needed you," Kellan replied. "More than breath, more than life, you saved me in every way a person can be saved." He died peacefully in his sleep 3 days later, surrounded by family, 73 years old and loved beyond measure. Diana held his hand as his breathing slowed and stopped, felt the moment his spirit left his body, and the world became suddenly dimmer. The grief was crushing, more intense than anything Diana had experienced in her 73 years. Half a century of life together could not prepare her for the emptiness of facing days without him. But she was not alone. Her children and grandchildren rallied around her, offering support and love and the comfort of continued family. Diana lived another 8 years after Kellan passed, years spent with family and teaching when she had the energy and watching the world change in ways she could barely comprehend. She saw the Great Depression sweep through even remote Fairplay, saw her grandchildren grow into adults and start families of their own. In the spring of 1933, as she lay in the same bed where Kellan had died, surrounded by her children and many of her grandchildren, Diana felt ready to go. She was 81 years old, had lived a full and extraordinary life, and was tired, but she was not afraid. She knew Kellan was waiting for her somewhere beyond, knew their story did not end here. "Tell the children," she whispered to James, who sat holding her hand. "Tell them about courage. Tell them that love is always worth the risk, even when it might hurt. Tell them their grandfather was the best man I ever knew, and their grandmother loved him with everything she had." "We will, Mama," James promised, tears streaming down his face. "We will make sure they know." Diana closed her eyes, feeling the pain and struggle fade. In the gathering darkness, she thought she saw a tall figure standing in the doorway, a man with gray eyes and an expression of joy and welcome. Kellan. Waiting as she had known he would be, she let go and walked toward him, young again in spirit if not in body, ready for whatever came next. Behind her, she left a legacy of love and family and courage, a story that would be told and retold through generations of Briggs descendants. The drifter and the sheriff's sister, who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting from their brave choice to take a chance on love. And in Fairplay, Colorado, in the mountains that had witnessed it all, their story became legend. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary lives are built from ordinary moments of courage, from choosing to see possibility in a stranger's eyes, from believing that this town needs a man like you, and being brave enough to give that man a reason to stay.